be seated this morning. Hallelujah. How many feel like they've been to church already? Come on. Amen. That was so weak. I mean, come on. We had 7 people baptized this morning. Come on. Amen. I mean, that's worth it right there. If we could say a prayer and go home, that'd be worth it right there. Seeing 7 people recognize, hey, this is me. I'm changing my life. I'm drawing a line in the sand. This is where I am. I know that doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect now that I got baptized, but guess what? I know where I'm going. I'm headed for this. I'm striving for this. And I know that God's going to make a way. Amen? Come on. If you want to be baptized, come on. We would love to have you. We'll set a date. We'll advertise it. And we'll get you on the docket. And we'd love to dunk you. And so, but we love it because it just means so much to us. That just means a big step in your life. And again, it doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means you're drawing a line in the sand and said, this is where I'm headed. This is what God means to me. So we're excited about that. It's funny. So we were talking, Melissa and I were talking. She's like, okay, so there's 7 people being baptized this week. I'm like, yeah, I'm so excited. She goes, we know that's not going to leave a lot of time for you. I'm like, what are you trying to say? I mean, am I long-winded or what? I guess I'm a little long-winded. So this morning, hopefully I won't be too long-winded. So she asked me Friday, she's like, well, how's it going? And I said, it's good. She goes, you making it short? I'm like, that was the intent. The original intent was to make it short, but it just kept going. And so, but we will make it shorter this week. It's funny, Pastor Steve preached last week. You missed it. I'll have it up this week on YouTube, but a great sermon. And I was talking to him about how it was going. He said, well, I started talking to God on Sunday and said, I don't want to think about today, but Monday, Lord, I want you to, give me a word. And it's like, boom. Monday comes along, Steve has a word, just starts writing. I'm like, man, it took me till Thursday of this week to get a word. And so I was like, as a pastor, that's a little stressful if you've ever been through it. But that's a little stressful. But he spoke to me Thursday. And what the Lord laid on my heart is actually kind of going off of what Pastor Steve spoke to. Because what Pastor Steve spoke last week really spoke to my heart. And if you missed it, it was a great sermon about how in the Bible is like, I don't know, you almost could compare it, and some of you will vote me down as a pastor for saying this. You almost say the Bible's almost like Facebook. Because you get all the highlights. And so you get all the highlights. So we read the highlights of the characters in the Bible. And he talked about Moses. I love the story he told about Moses. Moses is introduced to us, right? And then in my Bible, there's literally like a paragraph space and starts a new paragraph. Well, that space in between there was 40 years. So what was he doing for those 40 years? I doubt he was having a great time with God, or else we would know about it, right? God was speaking to him. He was walking to God. They would tell us that in the Bible. So that probably wasn't happening. And so it was a mundane life. It was the everyday life that he was living, that he was walking through. And Pastor Steve let us see last week how God is in the everyday of our lives. And so that really spoke to me. And so what I want to do today is I just want to tell you a story. And we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 9. And the title of the message today is Chasing Donkeys. Because I think a lot of us feel like we're chasing donkeys, right? And I'll get to it, and I'm not using King James this morning, so rest assured we're okay there. But what I'm saying is we feel like, here's the deal. We put God in this little box. And we think everything needs to happen inside this little box. And when things don't happen the way we think they should, or God doesn't move the way we think he should, then we get frustrated, right? And what happens is God's moving, and I know some people hate this statement, but God is moving when we can't even tell he's moving. Like, come on, just tell me a little sign that he's moving, right? What's happened is, here's our little box, here's our view of God, and God's moving all out here. And we're getting so frustrated, God, because he's not moving right here. And he's like, if you just stick with me a little bit longer, you see how I was moving all this time on your behalf. Because I know there's some of you in the audience this morning could tell stories after stories about what got you to this point. I can tell story after story how what got us to this point. I remember our first youth pastor position. We were so excited, full-time youth pastors, right? And we're getting ready to leave the camp, going to youth camp. Got everybody is loaded on the bus. The bus is running, which is dangerous, but then we have the air on, which is doubly dangerous. You know, church fans, you know what I'm talking about. You're just pushing your luck when you turn the AC on. But everything was working, right? And we're literally ready to pull out of the driveway, and the pastor comes up to me and says, hey, I need you to change that sign. And we had the old marquee signs. We had that a pole that had a sticky deal. You stick on them and then prayed it would stick and get the letters, you know, and it change it like that way. He's like, yeah, I need you to change that sign. I'm like, I just look around. Like the kids are like I almost had it in park. Like, you want me to get out? And yeah, I won't take you very long. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? He really wanted it done. We really got it done. But in those moments, in those mundane moments in the everyday life, you feel like you're chasing a donkey. Like, what am I doing? I wasn't called to be a sign changer. I was called to be a youth pastor. Right? And what am I doing this? This is way I'm supposed to be taking these kids. And it's so frustrating sometimes. It's frustrating because we experience that more often than not. Yeah, we have the times where you experience revival. You have those times where you're laid out in the Spirit. You have those times where God moves on you. But sometimes they're few and far apart. And so we get frustrated in the day-to-day things in everyday life because we don't feel like God is there. We don't feel like God is moving. But in 1 Samuel chapter 9, you see a couple things. On the big picture level, what you see is God is preparing a way for the coming of Christ through the kingship of Israel, right? God is preparing a whole line of kings through whom Christ, the King of Kings, will eventually come through. So we get that. So see, big picture, God's moving. Israel didn't even know God was moving. Israel was crying out for a king. They never had a king. They didn't know it was coming. They didn't know God was listening. And so Israel's crying out for this. And God's moving. They don't even know God's moving. But on a smaller level, in 1 Samuel chapter 9, what we see is God's working in Saul's life in a very special way. Even though Saul is ultimately not God's man, God gives him every chance, every opportunity to shine as a king. So what I want to look at this morning, I want to look at Saul's life, and we're going to learn a very important truth about our own life through Saul's life. That sometimes we think God only works in the big, spectacular moments of life. But that's not true. What we see in 1 Samuel chapter 9 is a wonderful demonstration that God is working even in the ordinary details of your life. Even in the ordinary, mundane details of your life, God is still working on your behalf for you. So the first thing we see, if we start looking at chapter 9 here, we were going to see that God's guiding hand is through this whole process, right? Let me read to you. Let me read to you here verses 1 and 2. It kind of sets the scene for us this morning. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abel, and the son of Zorah, son of Bechlorah, and son of Athaph, and a Benjamite, a man of wealth. He had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a young man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. He must have been really good looking. That's like, social media, no filter right there. Handsome, the handsomest guy in town. His shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. So here, let me set the scene for you. So we learn here about Saul, right? Saul is what? Saul's wealthy. Saul has servants. Saul's dad is well known. So Saul's dad is a man of the town. Everybody knows Kish, right? Everybody knows him. He's very well established. He comes from an established family. Saul's that, part of that. Saul gets all of that, right? And then, on top of all that, he's got wealth, he's got money, he's got influence. He's got the looks to go with it. I mean, he would be a bachelorette material right here is what we're talking about. He's that good. And so here is Saul, this man, handsome man, wealthy. And so he gets tasked. You look in verses, 3 and 4. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish says, hey, Saul, I want you and your servant go find the donkeys. What would you think in that moment? I'd be like, why don't you go change the sign before you pull out? I'd be like, what? You want me to do what? You know who I am? Well, yeah, you're my son. But Let me just buy you some new donkeys out of my allowance. I mean, come on. Why do I have to go do this? So if you saw an organizational chart back then, Saul would be like at the top of the organizational chart. And there'd be all these people underneath Saul, right? So it'd be like you. If you're a boss, you're an owner, you're a manager, it'd be like you getting tasked to do something meaningless. How would that go over in your life? Well, I'm sure you'd have questions. I'm sure you'd be like, well, don't we have people for that? I mean, really, though, don't we have, that's why I had kids, so I don't have to do yard work. I mean, why do I have to, so we have questions like that when we have to go through things and we're like, we have people, right? We made these sound panels recently for the help the church sound and decoration and all that. And so I always like to go cheap. And so I like, we can make them. Like, why not, right? About halfway through the process, I learned why not. And about halfway through it, I'm like, don't I have like an associate pastor, a kids pastor, somebody can be doing this? I mean, I'm covered head to toe in pink styrofoam, and it's messy. And I'm hot, I'm tired, I'm getting worn out. And I'm like, can't we just buy some? I mean, you get to that point where you find yourselves chasing donkeys, you're like, what in the world am I doing here? And in that moment, it's like you forget all about God. In this moment, Saul, if you read the story, Saul looks at his servant and says, you know what? I'm sure by now Dad's getting more worried about us than he is the donkeys. Let's just go home. Let's just go. Let's just quit. I just want to go home. Anybody feel like that? That one day I was working these foam boards, I felt like that. I'm like, I just want to go home. I want to get some cool iced tea. I want to shower, get all this foam off me. You feel like that. And we get in life, we get in these situations where, I commented last week, I feel like you're the hamster on the wheel. And you get worn out and you get tired and you're like, I just want to give up. I should not even be doing this job. There's people for this job. You just want to give up. At that moment, what would have happened if Saul would have given up? I mean, who knows? But more likely, he wouldn't have been king. More likely, he wouldn't be mentioned in the Bible. More than likely, God would have picked somebody else. These meaningless tasks. He was so close to giving up. But then, he had somebody in his life. How many knows God puts people in our lives? That God's working in the lives of the people around you. They may not even know it. They might not even be Christian, but God's working in their lives. Just like in Saul. Saul had a servant, right? So when Saul wants to give up, the servant says, hey, hang on a second. I know a man of God. I know a man of God. He's in a neighboring town. Let's go over and let's just inquire of him. And here's where Saul's at. He's just done, right? He's like, no, we don't have nothing to give him. We're out of bread. We just don't have nothing. And the servant's like, well, hang on a second. I got a coin here. At this point, Saul's like, you stupid. He's like, why did I even bring you at this point? I could be home by now, right? But the servant's like, I got a coin. Let's go give him a coin. And so you see how God was using the servant in Saul's life to work things out. How he uses the people around you. How he works through those around you to help you, to discover where God wants you to be. And then another thing that we don't like in this story is God's timing. How many likes God's timing? You like it when you get it, right? But for like the years you've been praying for it, it's not very fun, is it? Right? But sometimes it's just about his timing. In verses 11 through 14, I'm going to hurry. It says, I went up to the hill city, and they met a young woman coming out to draw water, and said to them, is the seer here? They answered, he is. Behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry, he's come just now to the city, because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you will find them before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So they went up to the city. And as they entered the city, they saw Samuel coming towards him on his way up to the high place. So look at this. God's timing, right? It just so happened that Samuel came to town that day, right? It just so happened they asked the girls about where the seers are, and they give them instructions. You see how God's timing? God's timing is perfect. If he would have arrived one day earlier, they would have missed him. One day later, they would have missed him. But God's timing is perfect. It was right on time to meet Samuel and line up things just the way, because God had a plan. God was working. Saul didn't know God was working. Saul didn't want nothing to do with it. Saul just wanted to go home. But God's working this whole time. Sometimes there's seasons in your life where the timing seems off, doesn't it? You're like, man, I'm not in tune with God this morning. I just seem to miss him. He doesn't seem to be lining up with I've got. And we get frustrated. We're frustrated because we feel like we're just chasing donkeys. It's not going anywhere. It seems meaningless. Everything's amiss. Nothing's coming together. But here's where we take confidence at, to know that God is working in the events of your life. God is working in those mundane events in your life. Because why? It's his timing, not your timing. God is at work in the interruptions and the setbacks of your life. God is at work preparing people around you. God is at work at the timing of the events. Just like Saul looking for donkeys, you may not always see it, but God's hand is there guiding you. And I want to condense this down. I want to try to wrap us up here. I want to show you a couple things here that you see in the last portion of chapter 9. First thing we're going to see is God's plan precedes your current circumstance. God's plan precedes your current circumstance. In other words, you never get in a jam and then God has to come up with a plan. In other words, you never get in a situation where you lost a loved one, your relationships is on the rocks, your finances are going south, your business is going, you never end up in that place and God's like, oh, I guess we better get a plan. You don't surprise him. He's already had the plan. It's in his timing. He's working things out for you. Look at verse 15. It says, now the day, what? The day before Saul came, the Lord revealed to Samuel. The day before Saul was even in the picture. Get this. All right, here's Saul, frustrated, chasing stupid donkeys. Just buy some stinking donkeys, would you? He's frustrated. He's upset. He just wants to go home, right? And all the way over here, unbeknownst to Saul, is Samuel. And God's having a conversation with Samuel. Say, hey, guess what? Saul had a plan, right? But God's plan precedes Saul's plan. God had things figured out. Saul's still frustrated. He wants to go home. God's working things out. Why? Because God's plan precedes your present circumstances. Saul and his servants thought they were just looking for donkeys. Before they got to town, God already revealed his plan to Samuel. So take heart. The second thing I want to show you is God's plan is bigger than you. Look at verse 16. Tomorrow, about this time, I will send, this is God talking to Samuel. Tomorrow, about this time, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. And you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. God's plan is bigger than your plans. Thank the Lord. Every one of you should be thanking the Lord. His plan is big. Here's our plan right here. Something we can imagine, something we can dream up. Here's God's plan, something we can never even see coming in a million years. I could never see coming in a million years that we would be pastors at Brighton. Never even entered my mind. Missions was great. We had a great life in missions. We loved missions. We loved the work we were doing. I could have never dreamt of this job. But here we are. And I'm so thankful that God's plan is a lot bigger than my plan, because I shoot way too small. And so here's the same outlook. Saul thought he was just out looking for donkeys, but God had bigger plans. Saul thought his servant was just along for the ride, but God had bigger plans. The servant girls of the well, they thought they were just drawing water that day, but God had bigger plans. You see what I'm saying? In the mundane, in the everyday life, when you think you're just chasing donkeys, when you think you're just pulling up some water, when you think you're just doing grocery shopping, God is at work in your life. Let's not forget that. Let's have confidence in that. Let's not think, well, where is God? God is right there with you. Even in the mundane parts of your life, God is with you, working in your life. You know, 3 times in verse 16, God emphasized, my people, my people, my people. Saul thought he was just looking for donkeys, but God was building a kingdom that day. God's plan is bigger than your plan. And here's another one we don't like. Well, that's the worship team, but they'll come back for me. God will tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. Oh, isn't that one frustrating? God will tell you what you need to know when you need it. When do we want to know it? Right now. God, tell me right now, right? We're only 13. God, tell me who I'm going to marry. You're only 13. God, tell me who we want it now, right? We want everything now. God, tell me where I'm going to work. Tell me what my wife, I want to know now. Verse 17, when Samuel saw Saul, that one will get you. Say that 7 times fast. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here's a man whom I spoke to you. He is who shall restrain my people. When Samuel saw Saul, God told him his name. God told him what he needed to know, when he needed to know it. God will do the same with you. I always want the information up front. But God doesn't usually work that way, does he? However, we can take comfort knowing that God will tell us what we need to know when we need to know it. Sometimes we don't understand God's plan, and that's okay. Proverbs 20:24 says, a man's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand his own way? In other words, how are you supposed to understand? God's way are higher than our way. You don't have God's foresight, do you? So you won't understand. You won't understand the purpose behind chasing these donkeys that you're chasing right now. All you understand is you're frustrated, you're upset, and you're just tired. Of course, we don't understand God's plan. But I want you to see something. I want you to see that God had a divine appointment for Saul. This meaningless task of chasing donkeys, your meaningless task of grocery shopping, your meaningless task of cleaning up whatever mess you have to clean up, this meaningless task can lead to a divine appointment. In verse 18 to 20, it says, then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, where is the house of the seer? Samuel answered, Saul, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place. Today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go and will tell you all that is on your mind. Oh, and as for the donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. Saul comes to ask Samuel a question about the donkeys. Before he get a word out, Samuel's like, hang on. They've already been found. They're okay. In other words, guess what? It's not about the donkeys. It never was about the donkeys. It was God's plan was different than Saul. How beautiful is this? Here's Saul living out his plan. He just wants to go home. He's done. He's tired. He's like, I'll buy Dad new donkeys. Whatever gets me home, I want to go home. And here's God working. And God's doing something Saul could never even dream about. Why? There had never been a king. This was something totally new. Saul had no idea. He was just living his best life, but God had a plan. And Saul thought, I'm just chasing stupid donkeys. Well, he's doing, he set up a divine appointment for God to move in his life. Saul is given a seat. Look at this. Saul is given a seat of honor, a special portion that was set aside especially for him. And it turns out the whole feast was actually in Saul's honor. Isn't that amazing? Now, I don't know what God's plan is for some of you. You may not always get the seat of honor, the best portion. You may not get a lot of the things the world values. But I know this, that God's plan for you is the best. I feel like this morning there's some of you that are chasing donkeys. You're tired. You're just sick of doing what you're doing. You feel like you're just hitting your head on the wall every day and nothing is making a difference. Some of you have been praying for the same prayer for years and years, praying for healing, praying for restoration, praying for a lost loved one. You feel like you're just chasing donkeys because nothing's happening. You're like, this is meaningless. Some of you have a call of God in your life and you're just working. Like, this is meaningless. Some of you may be stuck in a job right now. You're like, this is meaningless. I'm about to scream. I can't take it anymore. I shouldn't be doing this. Come to to tell you this morning, it may be leading you to divine appointments. That's not about chasing a donkey. It's about seeing God in every day of your life. It's seeing God in the mundane things. It's about seeing that there's opportunity, that God may be doing something in that moment that you can never guess in a million years, but God's moving. God's moving on your behalf. Sometimes you just feel like you're chasing donkeys, but you're part of something so much bigger. And so this morning I encourage you, don't get distracted by life. Don't get frustrated by interruptions and setbacks. Don't get discouraged by the daily grind. Christ died for you to make you his very own. So yeah, this morning you may feel like you're out chasing donkeys, but God is building a kingdom. And you never know how God is using your life and actions for his glory this morning. Would you stand with us? God is at work in the ordinary details of your life. And so our goal is to serve him, to glorify him. You hear that this morning? Your goal is to serve him, to glorify him, even when you feel like you're just chasing donkeys. This morning, don't get so frustrated. Don't give up. If Saul would have given up, he had missed out on all that God had for him. He wanted to turn back. Some of you want to turn back. Some of you want to quit. Some of you want to give up. It's not working for me. I tried Christianity. It's not working for you. Some of you are just tired. Like this has no purpose, has no meaning. I'm just wasting my life. I'm just wasting. Oh, but if you just hang on, look what God is doing over here for you. Look how God is setting up a divine appointment for you where you can influence, so you can change somebody's life, where God can change your life, where God can set you up. If you just hang on, don't turn back, don't stop, don't give up. Just keep on chasing those donkeys.